Okay, so ADHD in girls is often missed or overlooked. Um, the male-female ratio in terms of the diagnosis of ADHD in children and teens is 3 males for every female. And the signs of ADHD look different in girls. We'll see daydreaming in class, silliness or spaciness, shyness, picking at themselves, perfectionism, feeling anxious or sad, forgetfulness, emotional dysregulation, and sometimes trouble keeping friends. Girls show more signs of anxiety and depression than boys, and girls are often diagnosed at a later age than boys. Girls show less severe signs of both inattention and hyperactive and impulsive behavior in school, and there are fewer signs of certain symptoms of oppositional defiant behavior. What we'll see with girls sometimes are greater intellectual imbalances and a higher peer levels of peer rejection. And I think this is partially because we women are socialized to define ourselves through our relationships with others, whereas boys are socialized to define themselves through their accomplishments or athletic prowess. And so when girls with ADHD miss cues, struggle socially, they experience a real delay in their ability to make and maintain friends and a disruption. They want to connect, but they don't often know how, or they may miss things. There's a higher tendency for the internal traits of ADHD among girls: forgetfulness, difficulty listening, problems with verbal expression and verbal control. We'll see some difficulty with emotional control as well, and misreading social cues. This is really difficult, this misreading social cues and the challenges with verbal expression or control, because girls relate primarily through verbal connections. Research has shown that girls with ADHD are sexually active earlier than their peers without it, and as I said, they are diagnosed later. Interestingly, girls with ADHD tend to develop fewer friendships and are more likely to be disliked than girls without it. That can change over time. And of course, there are some girls who are super socially oriented, and that's the focus for them. So it depends. But what we see more often is that girls are more likely to suffer silently and show fewer outward symptoms of their struggles. And teachers and parents may miss seeing ADHD because the girls are flying under the radar. They're not drawing attention to themselves. Shame is a huge factor for girls with ADHD. They're ashamed of their difficulties and they're overwhelmed by the frustration or fear about possible negative outcomes. And some girls with ADHD will do anything to avoid disappointing friends and family, including themselves. One of the most important things that we have to do with girls with ADHD is not just normalize their challenges, but identify them. And that's why getting an assessment is so important. Where are their challenges? Do they have that within-person difference where they're really strong in some areas and just weaker in others? That occurs 35% of the time for kids with ADHD. What is their executive functioning age? So they may be 12, and in some areas they may act like they're 12, but in other areas we're going to see that 30% delay, and they may act more like they're 9. What's going to help girls? Well, first, weekly meetings are really important to help them organize their daily and weekly schedules, make plans and routines for when, where, what, and how to study, to do their chores, to help them break assignments down into more manageable parts, and to teach them how to manage time effectively. So we want to really use a skill-based approach with girls because their sense of themselves and the tendency for rejection sensitivity dysphoria is very high. And their sense of themselves, their self-esteem, can be lower. than we would want to see. And because girls are at higher risk for things like eating disorders or self-harming behaviors, we really want to pay attention to what we're noticing in terms of some of the signs that things are amiss: isolation, um, shyness, that type of perfectionism where they can't let go. So I hope that this little bit of information is helpful to you. And I see a lot of activity in the chat. Oh my goodness, I don't even know where to begin. Let's see, I'm gonna scroll up a little bit. Lots of people who are from all over, thank you. Stephanie says, thank you. When we had a diagnosis of our daughter 10 years ago, there was very little information on ADHD in girls. Yes, that's true, and that's changed quite a bit. Hi, Georgia, and Angela, and Stacy says, so everything negative, right? I'm more interested in the hope. So I'd like to know what you're talking about, because I actually want to focus on hope, but I think we have to identify what are the signs, what are those flags, so we can attend to the challenges and shore up the strengths. Stephanie says, this was one of the hardest things to help our daughter with. Other parents judged her, missed social cues. Right, so one of the challenges that's really hard for girls, particularly because so much of their self-esteem is tied into their social relationships, their friendships. That's how we women are socialized, to define ourselves, is we really need to focus on social cues, as social emotional learning tools, particularly. So eye contact, basic responses. If you don't know, if someone's saying something and you need them to repeat it, what are you going to say? How close do you stand to someone? In our culture here in the United States, it's about 3 feet. How do you ask questions? How do you wait for responses? These are all basic aspects of interactional skills that we want to teach our girls. What do you recommend for an 8-year-old girl who desperately wants friends? Megan asks. Support groups. Well, first of all, I would want to talk to her teacher, because I'm wondering what the teacher's observing in the classroom, and if there's a way to pair Megan with some girls who are like her, because that may take some of the pressure off. If we sit Megan down next to the most popular girl in the class, or the girl with the best social skills, that may be intimidating for her. Can she team up on a project with some other girls who may struggle a bit socially and need some help? I think support groups can be useful. Friendship groups are helpful. I've also found that a lot of girls in my practice really like improvisational theater. And this is a way to kind of draw them out, because improv is all about reading cues and responding. And this can be a great way for girls with ADHD to learn how to interact more specifically and have fun with it. Claire Louise says, my daughter is struggling so bad. I'm sorry. She also has Tourette's and ASD. She has really in extreme behavior, intrusive thoughts, rages, and meltdowns, which are causing many problems. So Claire, my question to you is she medicated? Is she seeing a therapist? Because both of those interventions would be helpful for her and for you. Hi, Lynn, Georgia. Let's see. My question, Elo, is about our 6-year-old girl adopted at birth. She is highly intelligent, most gifted, but struggles with hyperactivity and impulsivity. She's very coordinated and strong. So coupled with both of these worries me very much. Signs of ADHD started very early. Any advice on how to handle hyperactivity, impulsivity at this age, other than exercise and a good sleep routine? Well, exercise and a good sleep routine are very important interventions. She has a lot of energy. And what I might want to start with is, what part of her life would she like to change about herself? And maybe the best thing to do would be to start at the dinner table with interruptions. How to pause, how to take a breath, practice take back of the day. There's something that she says that she can actually take back and shift. That would be useful. But I would work with her together on picking one thing about herself that she'd like to see different, and then working with her on that, because you'll have more buy-in and likely more success. Stephanie, our daughter took her 504 plan to college with her. That's great. She meets weekly with a support person to plan out the week. So helpful. Stephanie, thank you so much for bringing this up. It is critical for girls to take their 504 plans to college. It's true for boys as well, but particularly for girls who feel embarrassed or ashamed, who are haven't necessarily, who actually need the help but are not super comfortable getting it, or for girls who really like the help and are like, yeah, I need this, let's do it, then we want to make sure that that scaffolding that we have in place in high school transitions to college. Let's see. Hi, Tina. Hi, Kimberly. Jennifer, can you talk about hormonal cycles and ADHD? Yes. So I'm not a physician, I'm a psychologist, but what I do know is that hormones affect pretty much everything in our female brains. And particularly as girls go through puberty, there is a kind of hormonal soup. And that when we are premenstrual, we are generally more sensitive. We have bigger feelings. And if we think about that in terms of kids with ADHD who may already be sensitive or who may already struggle with emotional control, those hormonal shifts are going to be harder. So these are some times where we might want to track the menstruation cycle, where we might want to figure out if there's some signs when a girl's menstruation is coming, so that we can say, oh, okay, you're going to be a little more sensitive here. Let's put this into place. Chris says, I'm almost 50 and I know this is me and my adult daughter. I recognize the signs. I still struggle. Thank you, Chris, for saying that. You know, I think that this is a lifetime of adjustment, of leaning into our strengths, developing our passions and interests. And that's really important for both girls and boys with ADHD. What lights you up? This is what we want to focus on for our daughters in particular. You know, I'm working with a girl, and she loves sports, and that's kind of a challenge right now in COVID world. But you know, her mother's doing a fantastic job of getting her to do like individualized sports. So whether it's fencing or golf or tennis, she's able to be out there, and her prowess in these areas allows her to have a good sense of herself. It's not the same, you know, it's not always translated to school, but having that sense of, oh, I'm good at this, you carry that confidence into, I'm good at some things, I can learn how to do a better job at this thing that's challenging for me. Rebecca, my daughter took an AVID class in high school and it helped. Now her 504 plan followed her to college, tutoring, meetings, and Concerta. That's fantastic. Kathy, it's so much harder for our daughter since puberty. Yeah. With my ADHD combo boy, puberty helped tremendously. Isn't that so interesting? So, you know, we don't know how hormonal shifts are going to affect our kids. But what I've seen a lot in girls I've worked with who go through puberty is, when they go through puberty, is that as they go through it and on the other side, they really struggle with emotional regulation around the time of menstruation, and sometimes after that as well, that they have these bigger feelings, this tidal wave of feeling, and they struggle with how to manage that. And so we really want to teach specific tools, and whether that's taking a break. You know, in my book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, I talk about stop, think, act. So we make a plan in advance of the meltdown for how we're going to deal with the meltdown when it occurs. Tiana says, 30 years old and still have no time management skills, LOL. Late diagnosis, so I know how much early intervention is important. Can't imagine what life would have been like otherwise. So I would bet you have some time management skills, or you wouldn't have showed up here at 4 o'clock when this started. And so, you know, teaching time management is a really important thing to teach girls. because when you feel like you can manage your time, you have more of a sense of efficacy. And so time management responds really well to direct instruction. Get a time timer. I wish I had stock in this company, an analog clock, which, you set the time and then you see the time go by. Teach the essentials of backward design. If you have to leave the house at such a time, how are you going to subtract how long it's going to take you to do the things you have to do before you have to leave? And to learn how to understand time. Kids with ADHD do not feel time. There's a time blindness. So let's use our technology to help us set alerts, set alarms, think about how long, observe, gee, I'm going to sit down to do my math homework. How long is it actually going to take me to do, 10 problems? So that we can start to associate time with activity. D, you said it sounds like autism and not ADHD. Well, a lot of kids with ADHD struggle with aspects of social life and as well as kids who are on the spectrum. So there can be overlap. The eye contact thing needs to go. So you can't, your daughter, Kimberly says, so eye contact is difficult for her. So what we might want to start to do for kids who struggle with eye contact is a quick glance. You look at them, they look at you briefly, and then they look away. We want to help them practice how to do that. And that's going to take time. And there's really nothing to doing it except for practice. And that's something that actually can happen with you, or it can happen in therapy. And yes, let's see. Tanya says 40 years old with ADHD and 3 boys with autism and ADHD in Australia, no real help here. I'm so sorry, and I'm so glad you're here, Tanya. So, maybe we'll do a session on the autism ADHD link in the future. I see that there's some people who are interested in that, so thanks for bringing that up. And thanks for showing up here. Attitude is a tremendous resource. They don't pay me to say this. I just love what they do, and they do it on, a very tight budget, and they produce incredible resources. So thank you, Attitude. What tips do you help coaches with girls with ADHD? So are you thinking about coaches like ADHD coaches, or coaches that have to do with athletic endeavors? So I'm not sure what you're asking, Angela. Please come back. Lori, my daughter is really struggling with school. So many kids are right now. She is intelligent, but doesn't seem to care about getting grades. She does the bare minimum, and I have to stay on her about turning assignments in. I've tried to break down her assignments in manageable sections, but she doesn't seem to be able to handle it. She is 15 and in 9th grade. I want her to be successful in high school. Any suggestions? So Lori, what your daughter is capable of producing now in terms of work may shift if and when she goes back to school in person. Many kids with ADHD are not able to produce the level of work that they're capable of or they want to produce because they have Zoom fatigue, they have school online fatigue or online school fatigue, and they are worn out. So what we want to do is to figure out together with her and maybe with a teacher, what is the bare minimum? What's the new bar? And then when she goes back to school in person, you negotiate the next bar. Right now, we want to keep her self-esteem as intact as possible. And so many teenagers are struggling with anxiety and depression. So that's something that I think is worth talking about with her. Rebecca, your active military duty, no meds. So that's all about executive functioning interventions. Jeannie, my daughter has ADHD, anxiety, depression, emotional regulation issues, rejection sensitivity, poor self-esteem, and feelings of failure. Wow, that's a list. Medication is not helping. Therapy doesn't much help either. I would love to find a teen group for her. Well, Jeannie, this is really interesting because I've been talking with a colleague about putting together a group for teens. So please follow my Facebook page at Dr. Sharon Celine. And we'll be posting something hopefully soon. I'm sorry that medication isn't helping. And sometimes individual therapy for teens may or may not help. It might be more effective to do some sort of family work, to set a family goal and what we're going to work on together. That might be a little bit easier for her. Excuse me. Sarah J. My daughter was diagnosed last year. Excuse me. And then I was a few months later at 37. Good for you. How do we help women and girls and women grieve? Oh, this is a great question. And process their experiences that they didn't meet the norm when they were brought up. Things like friendship losses, traumatic events, school struggles, that school struggles weren't because they were dumb or broken. Thanks. Sarah, this is a really important question, and I'm so glad you brought it up. Shame and the shame that has been laid on to people who didn't have a diagnosis, particularly girls and women until later, is at the core of your grief. So, I mean, is at the core of your grief because your grief is your way through the shame into something different and hopefully better. You were not treated the way you needed to be treated when you were a child. And you have every right to be angry about that, to be frustrated, to be sad. And you were blamed for being dumb or broken instead of being seen as someone who has a different type of brain, of learning brain. You know, a brain that's more, I would say neurodiverse, right? So I think it's important to understand, to accept the brain that you have by going through this process and identifying moments where you were treated unfairly, and really being able to process those with a therapist, and then to think about how you survived those times, because you are resilient, Sarah. You are, and so are the rest of you. You're all resilient because you're here now and you found ways to cope and get by and get through that are astounding to me. Let's make a list of what those are when you have a chance. Maybe right now, what are ways in which you have succeeded? How have you taught yourself how to manage time? How have you taught yourself how to make friends? Who manages in your life? How did you overcome some of those traumatic events? This is your resilience, and this is what we want to focus on moving forward. Athena says, mine is 13 in 8th grade, and it breaks my heart to see her failing and not caring. So what we want to do when we're setting that bar is, failing is not the bar, right? That's below the bar. But maybe the bar is C's. Maybe before it was A's, but maybe now it's C's. I have a client who, pulled all of the 504 strings that she could to get her 10th grade son, who's depressed, back into high school every day. And this child is he's a different child. Sometimes he's the only kid in the class. He doesn't care. He's so happy to be in school. And so I think we really can't underestimate the effect of being home, isolated from peers, and it's continuing on teenagers. Lucy, help. I'm a clinician whose colleagues mostly ascribe ADHD to trauma. What? And say things like, what would diagnosis achieve? Okay, Lucy, we may need to talk offline because that's absurd. So a diagnosis helps you create a roadmap What are your goals? How are you going to get there? What are some of the areas where someone is struggling? This is the importance of an ADHD diagnosis because there's an assessment of executive functioning skills. If there's an intelligence test, whether it's a WACE or the Woodcock-Johnson, we get a bucket load of information about cognitive strengths and challenges that we can then use to create our goal roadmap. Requiring eye contact from neurodivergent people, sorry, that went away. So eye contact, I'm not saying that we're requiring eye contact. What I'm saying is we want to practice so your child can make a little bit of eye contact. We all have different expectations in different cultures, but when people don't look in your eye in this culture in the United States, the assumption is that there's something not right, that they're shifty or they're not to be trusted. So we want to teach kids how to have even 5 seconds of eye contact, and maybe you want to start with 1 second. What's a 504 plan? Catherine asks. From Canada. So it's an accommodation plan. So in the United States, there are 2 levels of accommodation plans. There's a 504, which are accommodations, but they're not mandated additional instruction. And then there's an IEP, which is a mandated special education instruction. Jacqueline, you have a 6.5-year-old with ADHD and on the spectrum. We saw a huge improvement when we started meds a year ago, and we started with positive affirmations. High five, Jacqueline. I love this. Still struggling with emotional regulation, going from 0 to 100 in seconds. Yes, well, your child is still very young, and that's going to be a process for quite a while. But good for you for doing the positive affirmations. How does ADHD affect girls when they're at uni college? Louise asks. Well, so Louise, I think it depends if girls are diagnosed before they get to uni or if they're diagnosed at uni. So what I see is that for girls who've been diagnosed before they get to college, they can take with them their accommodation plans, or they can, seek out support services that the school may offer. For girls who go to college and are struggling and get diagnosed in college, it's a bigger shift. They have to accept that they have ADHD. They have to ask and set up help so that they can be more effective in managing their daily lives and their schoolwork. What I'll see in girls who go to college with ADHD where it's not diagnosed, and sometimes where it is that a lot of times they can manage one area of their life, but not 2. Okay, so they can manage like home living, but school falters, or they really manage school, but they can't manage sort of self-care. And this can shift, of course, with maturity, and with helping them really create routines so that they can follow those routines and they don't have to think about, oh, what I need to do when and how. Cassandra says, my daughter's 504 coordinators keep telling me that she should work to get off her 504 before she enters college. It's so frustrating. And I've had to work, darn, Cassandra, the Facebook got rid of it. So you've had to work hard. So here's the thing. I don't agree with your high school counselors that she should get off her 504 before she goes to college. If anything, she'll need her 504 at college because of what I just said. Whereas if she's living at home and she's now in college, college has much less scaffolding than high school, and kids are responsible for doing things on their own. And I can't tell you how many girls who go to college come into my office and have come into my office, and we sit down with their syllabi and a regular calendar, and we mark out when they have to do the readings, when the tests are, when the papers are due, when they have to start the papers. This kind of mapping is very important for girls, and they need help with it. Riona says, my 15-year-old daughter has high anxiety, misophonia, and recently given the diagnosis of ADHD, she struggles with math, but has big dreams when she's done high school. We're going to try remedial math along with her current math class. It's so discouraging for her. She gets really low when she does poorly. Any help for teacher suggestions? She just started meds a few weeks ago. So if she's good at other things, I would actually, of course, you need the remedial math so she can pass math. But if she's good at other things, let's try to grow those areas, those interests. If she likes to write, let's sign up for a creative writing class. Something where the things that she's good at can really blossom, and we will just, attend to the things that are challenges for her so that she can get by. Megan says, I'm having a hard time accepting medication for my daughter. Can ADHD be tamed for medication? Okay, these are coming by so fast. This person from Ireland, thank you so much for watching. Send your question again. Okay, so I don't understand what that question was about medication be tamed, so please ask it again. My daughter uses her phone timer for 10-minute increments to get ready in the morning. That's fantastic, Stacy. Brittany, I have a newly diagnosed, almost 8-year-old daughter. What is the most important thing we can start to do to start helping her? Routines and clarity about expectations, as well as affirming that all types of brains are fantastic. And hers is wired perhaps differently than someone else who's wired than someone else. We want to accept the brain she has. And for a lot of girls with ADHD, that means coming up with a name that's not ADHD. That might be fast brain, that might be dreamy brain. What actually is her experience of her brain? Because then she can own it. ADHD and nonverbal learning disability. There's not a lot of information available. I think that's true. I think that's because many people assume that kids who have nonverbal learning disability also are on the spectrum, and that's not necessarily the case. But I think that nonverbal learning disability is something that actually happens often with kids with ADHD, who have, it's one of the types of common learning disabilities. And so we want to, again, teach them how to process more effectively and give them tools for processing nonverbal information, visual and spatial information. Brenda, our pediatrician doesn't want to diagnose my daughter. Said it's just her being a kid. I did research, and then the pediatrician diagnosed her, and your question disappeared. I'm so sorry. I'm glad to hear that you got the diagnosis. Our daughter has always struggled with her emotions, particularly anger, overwhelming her. She's now 14. Is this normal for an extreme ADD child? Well, a lot of people with ADHD struggle with emotional control. And so I would say that is normal for people, for kids and girls and boys with ADHD. And when we want to teach emotional control, what we mostly want to do is not sink to their level when they're activated. We want to stay calm ourselves so we can help them access better parts of themselves, or we can remind them of the agreement that we have when they're dysregulated, and help them find ways to soothe themselves. Let's see, Kathy, you should be able to continue 504 accommodations. Okay, thank you. Let's see, diet and nutrition are crucial. Hope this might help your daughter. Okay, yes, it's always great. Sleep, low carb, exercise are everything. Fantastic. Sueli, I have a 17-year-old who does feel like the medication is helping. She's getting frustrated about her diagnosis and feels she will never hold it together to be successful and functional. Any recommendation for ADHD specialist in New York City? I feel like a general psychiatrist isn't the help she needs. She needs a specialist. Well, I would recommend the Hallowell Center. I believe there's one in New York City. And I want to say to your daughter that, do a Google of women with ADHD, famous women with ADHD, because there are many of them, and there are many people who are very successful. She will hold it. She will be able to be functional. It may take her a little longer than you might hope, but she will definitely get there. Giannis, my daughter has it, and I can't even talk to her about it. She's 21 at college now. That has to do with being 21. 21-year-olds know so much more than we do. And so what I would encourage you to do in this situation is just be available. If she talks to you or complains about behaviors that you know are directly related to ADHD, then you can jump in. I wonder if that's related to it sounds like that might be related to your ADHD. Um, just little things when she asks for your help. Unfortunately, it's very hard when kids are this age to offer them the support that we would like to. Lauren, thank you. I hyper focus on girls and women with ADHD because I spent my whole entire childhood and most of my life trying to struggle and understand what is wrong with me. Nothing is wrong with you. I had an IEP and developed anxiety. And thank you, Facebook, it took it away. So yes, so what I want to say is, yeah, I'm glad you're getting help. Good questions on the grieving. I was always told as a kid that I ruined everything. Oh, and that sticks with me today. Oh, Jennifer, that hurts. You know what I was told as a kid? I was too sensitive. That's what my parents used to say to me. Super sensitive Sharon. And they would like shame me for it. Here, you know what? Being sensitive is a great characteristic for being a psychologist. I was an actress and a singer and a good friend and a caring mother and a loving wife. So you haven't ruined anything. People project and dump onto you because they don't know how to respond in ways that are effective and compassionate. Don't pick that. I'd love you to reframe ruined everything into something else. How about like, did the best I could with the limited resources that were available to me? Alicia, my bar is just no Fs. All right. Lynn, at 58, I've never set any goals and have no idea how to. I think that's, Lynn, I have to say, you've been at a lot of these Facebook Lives, and I think you have set things that you've wanted to do and probably done in your life. And they may not be goals as such, but you're living, you're breathing, you're eating, you're sleeping, and you're taking care of yourself and others, I believe. So actually you have. Kylie, recently diagnosed at age 30, having a hard time talking to my mom about it. She denies any possibility and chalks my lack of organization, time management, forgetfulness, and struggle with focus to stress. My brother had it as a child and was much more hyperactive and struggling with educating mom on the differences versus hyperactivity versus inattentive. I would absolutely forward your mom some of these articles that Annie's put into the chat and other resources from Attitude, perhaps even a webinar. I know there's webinars about girls and women with ADHD. Have her watch something. If she loves you, she can take 45 minutes and watch a webinar or listen to it while she's doing, maybe folding the laundry. How do adults, Jennifer asks, go about getting evaluated and diagnosed? Well, adults, basically you can go to your PCP, your primary care provider, and ask for a referral to someone who does testing. You can also ask for a referral to a psychiatrist who will do an evaluation, or your PCP may have some forms for you to fill out as well. Okay. My daughter's diagnosis, Elizabeth, was the best thing for us. The added diagnosis of APD helped us see her world so clearly. I started the flight by myself, and I have the best team right now. Her IEP saved us. That's fantastic. Sarah, I'm a psychologist working in Australia in trauma with neurodivergent clients, and I also have ADHD, as do my kids. Colleagues don't think there is any benefit from identity claiming through diagnosis. Oh my gosh. Sarah and Lucy, oi! We got to get some information and training to Australia as soon as COVID is over. Let's think about how to do that. Do you have any support ideas for a 10-year-old with ADHD that hates music? Always has, doesn't like music teachers not understanding. Sometimes, as we know, sometimes kids with ADHD are very sensory sensitive, and music might just be like nails on a chalkboard. And if that's the case, what kinds of accommodations can be made? maybe music is not a class that your child needs to take. Maybe taking an extra art or an extra phys ed would be better instead of music if it's so unpleasant for them. Kimberly says the rejection sensitivity is the biggest obstacle I see at my house right now. And we're seeing higher amounts of rejection sensitivity, whether you meet the criteria for the dysphoria or not, because kids are isolated and depressed, because we adults are isolated and depressed. And so what we want to do is help kids manage their sensitivity in, by being able to say, where do I need to put on my Teflon coat? How do I want to respond when someone says this to me? Do I need to let this in as the truth? Do I have my own truth? My dad always says there are three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. And I think a lot of times for women who are rejection sensitive, we take someone else's word as the truth, and we dismiss our own perceptions. Jenny, I have a middle school age kiddo that just got her IEP for EF. We fought for years. What terms should I use to get her help with her handwriting? A dysgraphia is a learning disability, and if she has trouble with handwriting and she has trouble, does she keyboard? Because keyboarding can be super useful for kids with ADHD instead of handwriting. Handwriting is a motoric action, and it can be very difficult for some boys and girls with ADHD. So let's get her keyboarding as much as possible. Solely. Do you think there's any connection between ADHD and digestive problems like lactose intolerance? What food is usually not good for kids with ADHD? I actually don't know the answer to that question because I'm not a physician. But I think, if your child is struggling with certain types of food and digestion, I encourage you to talk to your physician. Heather, recently diagnosed 16-year-old, very resistant to all help support, medication therapy, academic support. Any recommendations? In situations where a teenager is resistant, I encourage you to go to family therapy with someone who really understands ADHD, because they are mad. They're mad at themselves. In a way, they're mad at adults for not finding this out sooner so they didn't have to struggle all those years. And they don't want to be different. They don't want to have a diagnosis. As one girl said to me, nobody wants to have a disorder. Who wants that? Who wants to have a disability? And she says, I think of it as an inability, because we all have abilities and some are better than others. So if you talk about it, because when a child in a family is diagnosed with ADHD, the family is diagnosed with ADHD. So we all are going to have to shift and understand what it is. Lori, I helped my daughter with her schoolwork and her planner. She has no interest. She's very disorganized. She's in school 4 days a week. I received an accommodation for this, but she's still behind. Is she receiving special education services? And if not, why not? It's very important right now as parents to not lie down, to basically say, this isn't working. We need more. My daughter needs more. What are you going to provide? You also might consider for kids who are, up to 11th grade, often National Honor Society students need to get community service hours, or college students. I went online just to look for a client, and we saw so many college students offering to tutor at very reasonable prices. So you may be able to get a high school student to do it for free for community service, or a college student at a reasonable price. Hi, Harlan. I think my earlier comment didn't publish. It seems that medication for girls is couched as mental health, and for boys, inhibiting some natural but overblown boyness. Well, that's very interesting. I think the challenge, and I'm going to talk about this when we do boys next week, so I don't want to give too much away, but the challenge is that boys with ADHD who can be very assertive, aggressive, loud, funny, that those traits are considered typical boy, and we don't want to change those. But for girls, they're sad or depressed, and we want to change those. So there is, a kind of gender sort of gender bias in how medication is viewed and dispensed. Alicia, sorry, Alicia. Newly diagnosed 8-year-old daughter. What's the important thing that you can do to start helping her? I think I answered that question. Megan, can ADHD be tamed without medication? I see. I have my hard time accepting that my daughter is in need of it. So that's up to you. You know, ADHD is a biologically based condition related to the neurotransmitters dopamine and norepinephrine. We can certainly teach executive functioning skills, and the brain's development is in our daughter's favor, but the absorption of those skills and the holding on to those skills happens more efficiently and effectively for kids who can take medication. So yes, it can be tamed, and there, you know, it requires extra effort. Christine, how does maturity in ADHD work? My now 12-year-old is performing much better in school in 6th grade than she did when she was diagnosed in 4th grade. She went last semester off medication and did really well considering, but keeping her room organized last semester is another thing, LOL. So again, you know, everybody's different, but maturity is in our children's favor. As their brain develops, it's going to make, the frontal lobes are going to make, you know, stronger and lasting connections to the other parts of the brain. And so they will learn the skills they need as they grow and mature. Is medication late? Tanya asked, later is effective later in life, and if so, what medication? I can't make a medication recommendation, but I have found that medication can be helpful at any stage of life. Lynn Thomas, back in the day, students struggling were put into a resource room with others who didn't. That's a bummer. A recent webinar by Attitude suggested we rename ADHD as VAST instead. They also said to describe it as a race car brain with bicycle brakes. When we're having problems, it's our brakes that are failing, not our brains. Right. So Neva, Ned Hallowell and John Rady wrote a book, and they've, you know, came up with this idea of calling ADHD VAST, variable attention stimulus trait. If you want to use that, that's up to you. Ned has been talking about the race car brain with bicycle brakes for years and years, and I love that analogy because it's not the brain that's a problem, it's the brake system. I agree. Renee, as you stated, a girl can be 12, but executive functioning 9. How do you balance that with everyday tasks and expectations? She's super sharp on some things, way behind on others. Could this be considered twice exceptional, excuse me, 2E? It could be. You know, I don't know what her testing looks like. But you know, the tasks that she's sharp on and she shows competency for at a 12-year-old level, that the expectations should be geared to her 12-year-old. The tasks that she struggles with and is showing you that she's more like a 9-year-old, those should be held at a 9-year-old level. And it's okay to have different levels for different tasks based on how your daughter's functioning is. Kim says, so many girls are having terrible social struggles at school. Yes, it's such a sensitive topic to navigate. You can't pull the plug on a friendship when many times they feel as though they have no friends, but some connections now are so toxic. What are you able to do about this? So this is a great question, and I'm probably going to stop with this question because we've gone over. There's so much to say. We'll obviously have to come back to this topic in a couple months. But what we want to do is we want to teach our girls that there are different types of friendships. So there are acquaintances, then there are friends, and then there are best pals. And who actually shows up? What does a friend look like? What does a friend do? What does a best pal do? And an acquaintance. A lot of girls want to be friends with the popular kids, but those popular kids aren't nice to them. And for those girls, I want to say, find your own group. Create your own group of popular kids, because then you won't feel bad about yourself. They're not your friends if they make you feel bad about yourself and less than who you are. And this is very difficult to communicate to girls because they don't want to hear what their mothers have to say. What do we know? And so I want to remind you that you know a lot, and that our daughters will have to struggle a bit. And I had this conversation recently with my daughter, and that she felt that I was, too controlling when she was a teenager. She wanted to do whatever she wanted, and that I was uncomfortable with her failing or some of the risks she was taking. And she's 100% right. I wasn't comfortable. I didn't like those risks, and I was, I tried to sort of control or steer her away. And sometimes we agreed on that, and sometimes we didn't. But you are the adult in this relationship. And so, you want to remember to show up for your kids with compassion, with kindness, and with understanding, because many of you, it seems like, have also experienced or live with ADHD, even if you're just recently diagnosed. So you can understand some of the difficulties your daughters may be having, accepting it, understanding it, embracing it, and managing the shame around it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Dr. Sharon Saline. Please check out my Facebook page at drsharonsaline.com and go to my website, www.drsharonsaline.com, for all kinds of free resources. And I also have a number of videos available on YouTube. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next week.